So today's session is about introduction to deep learning theory and code. The first thing I must explain here is that this is an advanced topic in artificial intelligence. I expect all the participants who are attending this to be good at mathematics, specifically probability theory, multivariate calculus, and optimization theory and algorithms, as well as basics of linear algebra and matrix manipulations. Apart from that, I also expect the participants to have the foundational knowledge of machine learning and other basic machine learning techniques, as well as uh, I would say practical knowledge of Python. So let us start. This is the agenda for today, where I will just explain the basics of AI, what is the impact it is having on industry. Then we will go for deep learning, specifically what is deep learning and why deep learning is useful. Then we'll just have a brief overview of applications of deep learning. We will also go through the neural networks, their architecture and theory, their mathematical basis on how neural networks came into being. Then some fundamental concepts of neural networks such as activation functions and some important characteristics and concepts. And after that, I will conclude my session and then we'll go for the code demo in Jupyter Notebook. So to begin with, what is artificial intelligence? So is it something new or is it quite old? So right now, if you just Google it, you will realize this term is not new. It is there since late 1940s. So this is not a new concept. The only thing or the only reason why there is a hype behind AI right now is that before I would say before the late 2010s, it was only a theoretical concept. It was not possible to have a fast computing hardware where you can actually try out all the algorithms what you have in theory. But now, because of the advancements in hardware, because of the advancements in GPUs, because of the advancements of tools and technologies, we are having this thing came into life. So moving ahead, this is the guy. His name is John McCarthy. He was the one in 1950s who defined this term AI. And according to him, artificial intelligence is the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. So this is the simplest way to define AI. It is science and engineering of making intelligent machines. So artificial intelligence enabled machines, are they new or you were using it before? So if I'm going to tell you that when you're a child, since childhood you are seeing the machines who are using AI, you will be surprised. So the first encounter of me with AI was calculator. So basic calculator is a very basic fundamental form of artificial intelligence, because it is an intelligent machine. It can compute, it can calculate, and that's how it started. But in modern day, you can find it everywhere. The chatbots, Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, self-driving cars, uh, the sophisticated semi-autonomous weapons, defense systems, missile defense systems, fighter jet planes, they all have components of AI in there. So this is the definition officially given in the document of Niti Aayog, the government of India, in the strategy paper of artificial intelligence, where they said that AI is a constellation of technologies that enable machine to act with higher level of intelligence and emulate the human capabilities of sense, comprehend, and act. So if you see this definition, there are three distinct parts of this. One is constellation of technologies, second is enabling machines with higher level of intelligence, and third is emulate human capabilities of sense, comprehend, and act. So moving on from this copybook definitions and stuff, how is it that industry is viewing this? So from the industrial perspective or from the perspective of commerce and economy, many industries are aggressively investing in cognitive artificial intelligence solutions. The global forecast says that compound annual growth rate of 50.1% will take this entire AI based or AI empowered industries to reach US dollars 57.6 billion in 2021. That is next year end. And there is a quite good reason behind this, because AI is expanding at a rate of knots. Every day there are thousands of new research papers coming in, thousands of new technologies, thousands of new tweaks to the existing technologies. And apart from that, there is a huge demand of using those sophisticated tools for a commercialization purpose. May it be improving your production, or may it be improving or increasing the speed of drug discovery, or may it be even for getting the manpower of higher quality. And if it is not possible, you can employ machines instead of manpower. Similarly, some of the hazardous environments where it is not feasible for human to go, you can use AI empowered robots to actually carry out the tasks. So that is some of the reasons why AI is actually expanding at a rate of knots, and in the future there will be huge demand of people who are master of their art or master of their craft. And that is the reason where I would say you all should learn AI, and I would say learn AI the correct way. Now, I will explain later on why I'm saying learning AI the correct way. Now, moving on, today's topic is about deep learning. So what is deep learning? What is it? I mean, deep learning is at the cutting edge of what machines can do, and developers and business leaders absolutely need to understand what it is and how it works. So to understand what deep learning is, we first need to understand the relationship deep learning has with machine learning, neural networks, and AI. So if I speak strictly in terms of academia, AI is just a concept or a principle. Machine learning is the application of the principle of AI, where deep learning is a specialized application of niche of machine learning. So deep learning is important for one reason and one reason only, that is we have been able to achieve meaningful, useful accuracy on tasks that matter. So machine learning has been used for classification on images and text for decades, but it struggled to cross the threshold where there is a baseline accuracy that algorithms need to have to work in business settings. But deep learning is finally enabling us to cross that line in places we weren't able to do before. So deep learning is something which I would say a specialized application of AI, where systems such as the recommender systems. So if you buy something on AWS or from Flipkart, you see the recommendations coming up. So all this is deep learning. You see the face recognition systems, you see the object detection, you see all the augmented reality and virtual reality tools. They all use one or the other way of deep learning. So in my background, where my background is from robotics, we used deep learning specifically for simultaneous localization and mapping, SLAM. And we used it for feature extraction, we used it for intelligent decision making, we used it for cognitive decision making processes. And so far, my experience with deep learning has been mainly in the two areas, one in the machine vision area and second in the natural language processing area. So the best way of thinking of the relationship would be to visualize this particular concentric circle or the Venn diagram. Now, if you see, the field of artificial intelligence is the universal set U, and machine learning is a subset of universal set AI, where deep learning is a subset of machine learning. So deep learning is subset of AI. So it is just a niche application of machine learning. So what is deep learning? So deep learning is a specific subset of machine learning, which is a specific subset of AI. So for individual definitions, you could see that AI could be the broad mandate of creating machines that can do something intelligently. Machine learning is one way of doing it by using algorithms to glean insights from data. And deep learning is one way of doing that. using a specific algorithm called neural network. So I would say do not get lost in the taxonomy that I am explaining. You will understand this just fine at the end of this session. Deep learning is just a type of algorithm that seems to work really well for predicting things. And deep learning and neural nets, for most purposes, are effectively synonymous. Although technically they are different, but just like neural nets, labels can have many layers of meaning. So deep learning is a process of applying deep neural network technologies to solve problems. And deep neural networks are neural networks with one hidden layer minimum. So like data mining, deep learning refers to a process which employs deep neural network architectures. And there are considerably many different deep neural network architectures, which I will explain later on. So deep learning is not a panacea. So it is not an easy one size fits all solution to every problem out there. There are different problems, and based on the different problems, you need to do your engineering properly and customize the deep learning approach according to your need. So it is not the fabled master algorithm. So deep learning will not replace the other machine learning algorithms and data science techniques, or at the very least, it has not proven yet. So I would say tempered expectations are necessary. That while great strides have been made recently in the contemporary deep learning, it is at the cutting edge of what intelligent machines can do. It does not scale to working on very complex problems such as solving world peace or solving the global food problem, or maybe solving the global conflict. So those are some of the really humongous tasks. And yeah, I would say deep learning is just in its cradle right now. So it will take its own time in order to achieve its own place in the society. So what is deep learning? Deep learning is to data mining as deep neural networks are to machine learning. So it is process versus architecture. So deep learning or data mining is a process where neural networks or machine learning are the architecture of deep learning or data mining. And you can see here, right? If you follow it here, my cursor, you see this artificial intelligence is a concept. It has its components in machine learning, and machine learning has its specialized subset, deep neural networks. Now, similarly, there is a concept of big data where data mining is one good component of it, and deep learning is one niche of data mining. And what it does? Well, data mining employs machine learning. So deep learning employs deep neural networks, and deep neural networks or machine learning enables data mining and deep learning. So data mining or deep learning are the processes where machine learning algorithms or deep neural networks are the architecture. So and all this could lead to the analytics, to lead to your business intelligence, to lead to your statistics, to lead to the data visualization, and these are some of the niche fields or subsectors of applications of deep neural networks or deep learning, that has vis-a-vis computer systems or computer vision, natural language processing or NLP, generative adversarial networks or GANs, hidden Markov models, etc., etc. So these are some of the things where you can find out such stuff, where there are niche applications of the deep learning concepts and deep learning approaches. Now, I know this figure is too much to take, but kindly bear with me. I will explain what this thing tells you. So deep learning infrastructure. So what are the things that you need in order to do successful deep learning? What is the hardware or what is the software components? What are the stuff that you need? So kindly focus on this particular highlighted rectangle segment, where we focus on the tools and frameworks that are used. So these are some of the tools and frameworks that we use. So frameworks are something like TensorFlow, PyTorch, FastAI, Keras. These are some of the frameworks that we use. And this is the software engineering platform such as Git or Visual Studio or Python, Jupyter notebooks, etc. that you need in order to actually deploy those frameworks and do something with it. Similarly, for resource management, you need Docker, or you can go on cloud, or you can use certain services such as Amazon SageMaker, for example, or you can move ahead and go for Kubernetes, for example. So these are some of the stuff that are cloud based that can enable you to manage your resources such as hardware, manage your resources such as networking stuff, manage your resources such as data storage systems, etc. So these are the tools which is used in development of your AI inference engine, and these are the tools where you can commercialize them or you can deploy them. What are the hardwares that are used now? So hardwares are pretty standard, I must say. That is processors, normal processors. That is Intel Pentium, Intel Core i5, those kind of processors. And if you really want to do, I would say, hardcore deep learning where you have parameters in billions, then you need GPUs. So one good company which do it for you is NVIDIA, where NVIDIA GPUs have specific drivers called cuDNN or cuDNN, where you can use them to accelerate your computations using the parallel processing enablement that you can get from NVIDIA. So now, moving on. So one thing I must explain here is there are not just these Python files, or they're not just data files, or this CSV files or Excel files, but even database can be used for big data processing. So if you are a huge company and you have a lot of data out there, and you want to apply some meaningful machine learning or deep learning models in order to help your business process achieve higher levels of efficiency, then you can definitely use those tools that are mentioned here, such as PostgreSQL or MongoDB or MySQL, DynamoDB. There are lots of different tools and technologies that are available for storage for data. So it is mainly these main parts. First is data or storage. Second is development or training evaluation. And the third is your deployment, where you use your continuous integration and continuous deployment CI/CD pipelines, such as Circle CI or Heroku, and you deploy your models for your consumers to use and your business process to improve. So this is the overall main architecture that you need in order to start using deep learning and deploy it for some meaningful business purpose. Now, moving on, these are some of the applications of deep learning. One very important application that we are seeing right now is self-driving cars. Many firms are behind this. Google is having their own self-driving car. Tesla is doing it. Tesla is, by the way, the most successful one to commercialize it also. There are plenty of other applications of deep learning in self-driving vehicle segment, which is self-driving drones, swarm technology drones. Then there are different robots and underwater vehicles for disaster management. There are numerous applications of deep learning in terms of news aggregation and fraud news detection, for example, in natural language processing, that is Amazon Alexa, or chatbots, or Google Assistant. Similarly, virtual assistants that we just talked about. And in the entertainment industry, deep learning is used. So I think all of you either have watched or you are aware of Marvel's Avengers movies, right? So what are those? The special effects that are used, the console that they create on the face of the Iron Man, what is that? So these all are powered by one or two the artificial intelligence concepts. And many of them use deep learning. So what is Jarvis, for example, for Tony Stark? So Jarvis is one virtual assistant that uses sophisticated natural language processing. Similarly, in the visual recognition industry also it is used. So for example, the surveillance systems for the government, or crowd management systems in the Kumbh Mela in the UP Prayagraj Kumbh Mela that it was used. All these are visual recognition systems. If you are chasing a criminal, you want to identify criminal using the infrastructure of the CCTV cameras that is there, you can definitely use this visual recognition kind of tools where you can actually track and identify and nab the criminals, or you can even predict the crime just before it occurs. Those kind of stuff can be done in crowd management systems, for example. Similarly, in the banking sector, people use this deep learning for fraud detection. In healthcare, people are using deep learning for advanced medicinal treatments, for medicinal development, for generating new medicines, for finding new cures. Even people are using deep learning for finding the cures for coronavirus right now that we are all plagued through. So for personalization, for example, so recommender systems, those are deep learning things. Facebook uses deep learning. AWS is using deep learning for recommendations. Facebook is using deep learning for suggestions that they suggest on your timeline. Twitter is doing it. And similarly, detecting the developmental delay in the children. So when the children are prematurely born, people are using such sophisticated deep learning technologies to actually track the development of children, how they are going through, what are the shortcomings that they have, how to go about it, how can we change the diet accordingly, and we can actually increase the development speed of the underdeveloped children. So those kind of stuff is there. In education industry, the deep learning is used. One such startup is Advisely, where I am a consultant with them, and we have developed the self-learning solutions for engineering. We also have MIT as our partner, technology partner, where we have the automatic correction system as well as the automatic remedy system, where if you have given an exam and if you have not been able to do well in certain concepts, it will actually map your concept to the fundamentals of it, and it will suggest the remedy for you to improve your knowledge in that particular segment, and then it will give you the retest of with a different version, of course, in order to try it out. So those are some of the applications of deep learning. Deep learning has their applications in many other sectors also. It is there in space, it is there in defense, it is there in environmental conservation, it is there in energy sector, it is there in finance sector, and the list will keep going on. So now moving on from the applications, I hope you guys have mustered the enough motivation to go through and learn deep learning technologies. Some of the other applications is adding sounds to silent movies that we have already seen, right? Colorization of black and white images or black and white movies. That is also something we have seen with the movie called Mughal Azam, that people did it. Then automatic machine translation, that is Google Translate that you use. Then automatic game playing. So this is something which you normally do, right? We use reinforcement learning algorithms in order to deploy the agents to play the game. And mind you, I mean, they have been quietly progressing in it, and the game agents are mighty effective that they can actually beat the champions of the game. Then language translations, then pixel restoration, photo descriptions, demographic and election predictions, deep dreaming. There are plenty of other applications of deep learning which you can use. So it's quite, I'd say, open-ended theme right now for you to choose. Now, moving on, let us start from neural networks. So what are neural networks? And why should we use them? Or how they came into being? What was the inspiration for the scientists who actually invented this concept of neural networks? So neural networks are not a new concept. They are quite old. We as humans or any living being with a brain will have neural networks in their brain. So from our brain structure, the scientists and the mathematicians got this inspiration of neural networks. So in our brain, the nucleus holds the genetic information that is called DNA. Now the cell body processes input activations and convert them to the output activations. That is, This nucleus or this yellow dot that you see here, it holds the genetic information, example DNA. Now, the cell body processes the input activation. So what are the inputs? These dendrites that you see here, these are the inputs to your nucleus. They all will be inputted, and then it will be converted through this cell body, and it will be converted to the output activations, and output activations will be gone through this myelin sheath, through this axon, and this axon ending is your output. So this is what the actual biological neuron looks like. So dendrites receive activations from other neurons. That's how you can actually stack them or cascade them in multiple layers, in multiple dimensions. So axon transmits the activation to other neurons. So this axon could become the dendrite for the other neuron. It will give or pass on the information to the next neuron, which is in connection with it, or multiple neurons which are in connection with it. The axon endings along with neighboring dendrites form the synapses between the neurons. So synapses are nothing but the connections between the neurons. So actually, when you are learning something new, you are actually forming these new synapses in your brain when you learn something new between your neurons. So one such common example where people uses the existing synapses would be the analogy. So if you are learning some concept which is new to you, but then during the process of learning, you actually think that well, you have some similar structure in some other completely different concept. So for example, when Ford is the company, by the way, who had this assembly line for their cars. So when the Ford actually sent out their employees to innovate this process of car making, you will be amazed to hear that this idea of assembly line came from one butcher shop. The butcher was having this assembly kind of line where the loaf of meat is there. Then the specialized people are taking off the skin, the other are taking off the bones, other are chopping it, and all this is happening on the one conveyor belt or one line. From there, these guys got this inspiration. So this kind of analogical things often comes from the pre-made synapses connection that you are having here. So now how you translate this particular biological thing into your program or into your mathematics? This you can see from this particular image. So consider this x0, x1, x2 as your dendrites or as your inputs, and this particular giant circle as your nucleus and cell body. Then what it does is it is actually summing up all these inputs by its weights. So these W are their weights. So W0 will be weight for x0 input. W1 will be weight for x1 input. W2 will be weight for x2 input. Likewise, they are multiplying the weights to the respective inputs and they are summing it all up. After that, they are adding the bias, and after adding the bias, they are passing this entire number through a particular function which is called the activation function. So activation function could be called as axon maybe, or myelin sheath, for example. And then this is your output axon where you get this function output. Now this could become the input of your next neuron or next layer of neurons, or it may be that it becomes your output. So this is how the analogy was used in order to translate this particular biological concept into the mathematical concept. Moving on, this is one basic structure of neural network. Consider all these circles as individual neurons, these arrows as their connections or the axons. So first neuron is of first layer is connected to all the neurons of second layer. Similarly, second neuron of first layer is connected to all the neurons of first layer. So this is how the input to the output connections are made. So this is one basic structure. Now, the layer which is there at the input are called your input layer. So this particular layer is called input layer. The second layer that comes after the input layer, but which is before the output, is called the hidden layer. So this particular neural network has two hidden layers, by the way. This is hidden layer 1 This is hidden layer 2. And this particular circle here is your output layer. So what are these circles? These circles are nothing but your activation functions. Now, input layer may be your just a number or the input number that you are trying to give. This may not be input, the activation function, but these particular hidden layers will be input, and this will be having the activation functions. Similarly, these also will have its own activation function, and this will also have its activation function. So what is this kind of neural networks are? So they have 3 inputs right now. This particular neural network has 3 inputs and 1 output. And this particular architecture that I am showing you is called multi-layer perceptron. Why multi-layer? Because it has more than one hidden layer. That's why it is called multi-layer. So this is multi-layer perceptron neural network. One very, very basic architecture. Now, as I told you, if we consider these as our inputs, x1 to xn, and w1, w2, w3, wn as their respective weights, all your neuron does is multiply this weight with the input, similarly multiplies this weight with this input, and respectively doing this for each and every neuron, combining all this and summing it all up, passing through an activation function and generating the output of this particular neuron. So this is this entire thing from here to here is your particular neuron. So as I promised, that I will explain the mathematical things behind it. This is the mathematical function that it is, and this is quite easy. I think this is just a basic linear algebra where your z, which is nothing but this particular z, the exome, is nothing but a function of your inputs multiplied by your weights and sum of all this. So if I have n neurons in my previous layer and all of those are connected to my this particular neuron or this layer of this neuron, then I just sum all n neurons with the respective weights and the input values, and I pass it on to the function and I generate my output. So what is the dimensions of your inputs? Dimensions will be 1 cross n. Simple. N neurons, and each and every neuron has their own value. So it is just a vector of 1 cross n. So it is a column vector, by the way, 1 cross n. What are your W's or the structure of your W's? So basic rule of matrix multiplication tells you if something has a structure of 1 cross n or 1 cross n dimension, then a suitable vector or matrix that needs to be multiplied with it should have this n or this width as its row dimension, and that is what it is. It is n cross 1. It can be n cross n also. It depends what are you trying to do, but now it is, for here it is n cross 1. And what will be the z? Z will be a scalar value. What is it? 1 cross 1. Why? Because you multiply all this and you get a scalar value, because this n and n cancels out. That's how the geometry of matrices works. And what you do after getting the z that you have, you just add your bias if you want to. It is completely optional that you want to add or you don't want to add, and that's it. Your bias is just a scalar, 1 cross 1 in this particular example here, and that is how this particular input is computed. So for example, now moving on, for the very same basic layer that I showed you here, 3 input neurons, first hidden layer 4 neurons, second hidden layer again 4 neurons, and 1 output layer. This is how the structure will look like, because all the inputs are connected to all the other outputs. So these outputs are connected to each and every neuron. So this one particular input has 4 connections. Similarly, this also has 4 connections. This also has 4 connections. That is connection to the all of them. This is your structure will look like. So your weight matrix will be W cross 1, where this 1, 2, and 3 row will represent your inputs, and this 1, 2, 3, 4 column will represent each and every respective neurons of your hidden layer. Similarly, your weight matrix for your first hidden layer to the second hidden layer will be 4 cross 4. Why? Because you have 4 neurons here. So first hidden layer neuron, second hidden layer neuron, third hidden layer neuron, and fourth hidden layer neuron. And similarly, the first, second layer hidden layer neurons, then second, third, fourth of this, all these hidden layer 2 neurons will be on this column, and then this will be your weight matrix for your transition from first hidden layer to second. And similarly, because this is just a one neuron output, this will be just a vector where 4 is nothing but your 4 rows, and this becomes your output. So this should be actually a column vector actually, but this fine, it's okay. So this is how it goes. Now moving on. So far I have explained you about your inputs. So far I have explained you about your weights summing up, but I have never explained what the hell is this function about. I'm very sure you guys must be having this question. What are the function or activations that we used or that we mentioned? Now you will understand what I'm talking about when I'm saying activation functions. So there are different activation functions. One very, very common activation function is rectified linear unit known as ReLU. So instead of sigmoids, the recent networks prefer the ReLU activation function. I will explain what are sigmoids in the later slide. So ReLU activation functions are what? What are they? Well, they just put out the maximum value of x, given x is greater than 0. If x is negative, then it will just put out 0. That is what the basic form of ReLU looks like. One major benefit is that it has a constant derivative value for all the inputs greater than 0. The constant derivative value helps the network train faster. I will explain why the network is training faster if you have constant derivative values, because we will use the optimization algorithms such as gradient descent or Adam optimizer or RMS prop or something like that. So when you are computing these gradients, you need to take the derivative of the outputs or the output values of your neurons, and if you have a constant derivative value, that will definitely help you achieve the training goal quite fast. So this is what the basic ReLU activation functions looks like, and this is the image which explains what the ReLU function is. So for any value of x which is negative, it is 0. For any value of x which is positive, it is just that value. That's all. That's all it says. And that is why you get this linear slope here. And that's how you can represent it mathematically. The maximum value between x and 0. So for all positive x, it is just the value of x. Moving on, this is one more activation function. This is I explained in this slide, this sigmoid. So this particular function is the sigmoid, denoted as the sigma symbol. So sigmoid function is a mathematical function having characteristic S-shaped sigmoid curve. So if you look at this particular curve, this looks like S-shaped curve. And what does this particular function looks mathematically? It is quite simple, isn't it? It is just 1 minus exponential and taking the reciprocal of this 1 minus exponential. So this is a log natural, that is 2.718 natural E, and you just raise it to the power of negative x, or the input value of your negative input value. Then you subtract it from 1 and you just reciprocate it, and the value that you get is called your sigmoid. One important characteristic I would like all of you to note here is sigmoid gives the values between the range of 0 to 1, and it also can give you the negative values. This is one inherent advantage. It is compressing down all the values between the range of 0 to 1, and it can also give you some negative values. Where here it does not give you negative value, but then the virtual theoretical constraint will be up to positive infinity. So as big as your input, it will just give you the number. But here it is not the case. It is compressing it between 0 and 1. And this 0.5 could be your threshold where you can say if anything that is above 0.5, you take it as a positive. If anything is below 0.5, you just take it as a 0. So whenever you are dealing with probabilities, whenever you want to use probabilities as your decision making parameter, you are realizing, right, that sigmoid is one function that could prove very useful to you. So this is one more type of activation function. Now this is another type of activation function. This particular activation function is called hyperbolic tangent. So I hope all you are aware of what is hyperbolic tangent. So it is nothing but normal sine, cos, tan, cot, cosec. All these functions are defined on the unit circle, but hyperbolic functions are defined on hyperbola, hyperbolic curve. That is the only basic mathematical and geometrical difference you get. So it is a, well, it is kind of a sigmoid function only. It looks like a sigmoid function only, but it is having quite a different way of looking at it. So it, although it looks similar to sigmoid function, it is not actually the sigmoid function. Why? Because it is what the equation will tell you why it is not. So it is the mathematical representation of your hyperbolic tangent is e raised to your input minus e raised to your negative input divided by e raised to your input plus e raised to your negative input. And again, this is also compressing everything between 0 and 1. Sorry, minus 1 and 1, not 0 and 1. This thing was compressing the particular output range between 0 and 1, where your hyperbolic tangent will give you from minus 1 to 1. This is the basic fundamental difference. Otherwise, it also has this characteristic S-shaped curve. Now, those are some of the activation functions that I explained. I just want to mention a caveat here that these are not the only functions that you have. There are plenty of different activation functions out there. These are the three most basic ones, and hence I explained it to you, because if I go in too much of detail in explaining all the activation functions and the optimization algorithms and all, then my session will be stretching to at least 5 to 6 months, and I think we do not have that much of time. So that's why I just explained these three activation functions to you. Moving on, again some mathematics of neural networks. So before I just explained the first layer or just one layer and how it is computed. What if you have multiple layers? So what if you have 3 layers maybe? So this is what this thing is explaining to you, where the first weight matrix of this particular layer here, for example, is given to the or given as A1. Then that A1 becomes the input to your second layer, and the output of your second layer becomes your input to your last layer, so on, that it will just go on cascading. And how can you define it mathematically? You can define it mathematically like this. So input vector multiplied by respective weight and passing through a particular activation function, this entire thing now, so this particular entire thing becomes your new input. You multiply that to the respective weight of your next hidden layer, and you pass everything to your hidden layers activation function f, and then again you treat the output of it as a particular input, that is A2, and you multiply it with your weight, and again after doing that you pass it on to your activation function and you get the output. So this is how you can visualize this mathematically, and using the basic concepts of linear algebra. Now, what is the loss functions that you try to optimize? So whenever you are optimizing, you need to have some function, right? You need to have some objective function, and you will optimize that objective function. Maybe you minimize some error, or maybe you maximize some profit. Similarly, you may be maximizing the inherent intuition or cognitive parameters. So there are plenty of ways you can define your objective functions. Here, for a particular classification problem, one particular objective function that you use is called categorical cross entropy, that you can read here. So what is categorical cross entropy anyway? So if I take y as my actual output. So the output that I expect, or the output that should be there from my neural network, and y hat is your actual real time output. So this is the theoretical or the concept output that you must get, but this is what you are getting actually. What you do is you are doing nothing but taking the inverse of multiplying that with a log. So we are doing nothing but we are just actually computing the error. And how we are computing the error? We take the respective y, we multiply it with that particular respective y hat or log of that y hat, and we sum all up and we try to minimize this particular thing. This thing is called categorical cross entropy or cross entropy for short. So this is your theoretical output, this is your actual output. You just take the log of your output of your neural network. You already know beforehand what your original output is. You just multiply it and you just take the summation of it. Well, this negative sign here just represents that you want to reduce the categorical cross entropy. That's all. That is why we are having this negative sign, that we because we want to reduce our error. Now, what is entropy? I hope you guys are aware of information theory, because this is one concept which comes from the information theory. And well, entropy is actually the measure of information. One chemistry or physics concept of entropy is the amount of chaos that you have. So, for example, I have some data points and all those data points are scattered randomly. There is no fixed pattern to those data points. Then I would say that entropy of that particular data set is high. So the chance of getting some useful information is quite high because data is chaotic. Similarly, the cross entropy is actually representing the entropy between two different variables. So here we have two variables of y and y hat. And that is the reason we use this word cross entropy, because it is not one variable to itself, but it is one variable with respect to the other variable. And that's how this cross entropy is defined. So this is quite intuitive, isn't it? You just try to minimize the categorical cross entropy. And by the way, after doing this minimization, you expect your neural network to perform well. So all you are trying to do is you are trying to get the values of your y hat or getting the values of your s of y nearer to the value of L. Basically, you are trying to minimize this as much as you can. So more the minimization, the more this value will be near about, and more close your neural network will be to your desired behavior that you want from your neural network. So this particular concept is mainly used in classifications. Well, there are different objective functions apart from categorical cross entropy. There is binary cross entropy, there is sparse cross entropy. There are different concepts of this, and which is beyond the ambit of again this particular lecture, because if I go into detail it will actually take longer time. So this is just one very widely used concept that we use. By the way, categorical cross entropy is used for multi classification problem. So if you have a problem which is more or less yes or no type of problem where you just have two categories, you use binary cross entropy instead of categorical cross entropy. Now, for this, so this was for the classification. Now, what if you want to do something for regression? So what if I want to predict the price of petrol or for diesel for that matter? So for those kind of problems where when the output of your neural network is regression, and for that particular regression, your objective function is your mean squared error or root mean squared error. And I think you all are aware of this root mean square approaches, right? So you do nothing but you just take the subtraction of the output of your neural network to the actual desired value, and you take the square of it, and you divide. You just sum it all up, and you divide it with your overall number of observations, and you take the square root of it. So if you think about it mathematically, if you think about it geometrically, this particular thing should ring a bell in your head. This does look like a deja vu, isn't it? And what is this deja vu? This is nothing but your Euclidean distance, isn't it? You are minimizing the Euclidean distance. That's all. So now you know, right, what is the mathematical connection to your neural networks or deep learning is. It is all mathematics. Quite basic, I would say. So this thing right now that you are saying, root mean square error, is nothing but a Euclidean distance between your observation and your actual output of your neural network. This is all you do. So when you are minimizing your root mean squared error, the working of your neural network will go towards the desired behavior that you want. So apart from this also there are different approaches which we are not going in detail. This is not just one that you can use. You can use many different objective functions. So you just minimize error in this particular concept, which is most generalized and it is most widely used also. Now, what do you see in terms of loss function? So as a base parameter for tuning weights, if you see this is W or this is your weight and this is your desired output or the error of your output, and what you do is what you are trying to do is you are trying to minimize your objective function and find the global optima, which is here. So if your output is somewhere here, all you are trying to do is you are trying to compute the error and you take the derivative of it. So why are you using the derivative? What is the use of the derivative? The most important use of the derivative is, I think there is some disturbance in the somebody's mic. I would request you to turn it off so that I can explain it, please. I think there is some disturbance in someone's mic is on. I request the participant or the faculty who is attending to turn the mic off. Thank you. So the neural networks that you are seeing here, so loss function that you are seeing here, when you take a derivative of the sign of your derivative will point you to the direction of the weights that you are trying to do. So
Yeah, but actually,
if you take the derivative here, this particular thing will give you the sign that you need to increase your weight. So if you take the derivative here, the sign of the derivative will be negative. That means it will tell you that you are in the right direction, and because you are in the right direction, increase the weight. Similarly, if you have overshot this particular optima, you will be here. Now if you take the derivative here, then the sign of the derivative will be positive. So that means you are increasing the error. That means the derivative is telling you that you should decrease your weight so that you reach here. And when you reach here, your derivative will become 0. That means you have reached the optimal point. Now, this is the back propagation and forward pass that neural networks normally do. So, for example, let us look at the forward pass right now. This is the input that you have. Input going through the hidden layer of neurons, giving you the output. Output going through the next hidden layer and giving the actual output that you're trying to have. This is called the forward pass, this particular pass. Now what you do, you subtract or you take the difference between your actual output and desired output, and you compute your loss function. Loss functions give you the measure of your error. And what you do, you take the derivative of this and then you back propagate this particular error to modify your W's or your weights according to this particular phenomenon that I just explained. And then based on that, you modify your W's right up to the basic first layer or the input layer, and then again you compute the forward pass and you repeat this process. So this is called back propagation, this is called forward pass. You repeat this entire process in loop till you reach this particular point I explained here. Now, this is just the mathematics of your back propagation of your error and updation of your weights. And this is an important thing I request all of the participants to focus on in here. where I will explain some of the important hyperparameters that you will need. So this is the forward pass. If you start from here, just wait till it comes here. So this is the forward pass. It goes from here to here up to the last neuron, compute the last function, give the derivative back, and then you update the parameters, and then you again restart. So what is this particular thing is doing? It is doing nothing but it is computing the error with respect to the respective weight of that particular output layer. So error and its partial differential from the respective weight, and you try to back propagate it through this particular chain rule of your partial derivatives. That's why I told you you need multivariate calculus. So what you're trying to do, you are just taking the E, that is your output error, and you take the derivative with respect to the your respective outputs or weights of your hidden layer outputs of your neural network. That is why this is called del y net. That is for neural hidden layers of your neural network. And what you do, you multiply that with the derivative of output of your network with respect to the weight of that particular layer. When you cascade this or when you expand on this chain rule, you are actually getting the difference or this delta x, and that is y desired minus y actual multiplied by x. That is what you are getting. And how are you using this delta x? Well, you are using it to update your weights, isn't it? How you update your weights? You do nothing but you just take the older value of your weight and you add this particular correction multiplied or weighted by this eta. Now this eta is your learning rate, and your del x or delta x is nothing but your error. That is this differential of error with respect to weight. So this is what you are doing, and this is how you are updating your weights, and you are beginning your next forward pass by doing all this. So old weight minus derivative of that particular weight into the learning rate will give you the new weight. That is what this thing is explaining. Moving on. So far we have talked about the architectures, we have talked about the neurons, the forward propagation and back propagation. We have also talked about the activation functions. But how are we going to optimize comes right now. So these are some of the performances of some of the optimization algorithms. That is this stochastic gradient descent, then momentum algorithms, then energy, ADA-GRAD, ADA-delta, RMS-prop. All these are different, I would say, different optimization algorithms, and these are some of the comparisons of it. Where if this is my error, this particular thing is my error, these are my two weights on this particular axis, then in this particular 3D space, you can see these optimization algorithms and the objective function value, which is denoted by this small circle, rolling off to your minima that you are trying to do. This is just a representation that I thought would be useful for people to listen to it and understand. Now, moving on. Some of the optimization algorithms that are out there. One is ADAM that I already spoke before, that is adaptive moment estimation optimizer. So this method computes the individual adaptive learning rates for different parameters from estimates of first and second moments of gradients. And scientists describe ADAM as combining the advantage of two other extensions of stochastic gradient descent, namely ADA-GRAD and RMS-prop. So what is ADA-GRAD? ADA-GRAD is adaptive gradient algorithm that maintains a per parameter learning rate. So for each and every parameter, the learning rate is different, and that improves the performance on problems with sparse gradients, such as natural language processing and computer vision problems. Similarly, root mean square propagation or RMS-prop is one particular algorithm which also maintains the per parameter learning rates that are adapted based on average of recent magnitudes of gradients for that particular weight. So how quickly it is changing. This means the algorithm does well on online and non-stationary problems. So some of the Applications is when you have a real-time data coming in. You have a robot is getting real-time video, or the car, for example, that is getting real-time video, and you want to really uh, compute it in this particular noisy environment. Then this kind of RMS prop or this kind of optimization algorithms are better comparatively. So when you use ADAM optimization, you actually combine this adaptive gradient algorithm as well as RMS prop. So it realizes the benefits of both AdaGrad as well as root mean square. These are some of the optimization algorithms. There are plenty of other algorithms available, as it is explained here: AdaGrad, RMS prop, stochastic gradient descent with Nesterov parameters, Ada delta, and others. And this is some of the all these algorithms applied to your MNIST multi-layer neural network plus dropout. So by the way, MNIST is a data set which has fashion related data for apparels and shoes and t-shirts and stuff, and those are images, and those images are classified. So that is the problem that you're trying to solve. And among all the algorithm that is there, the algorithm which is giving you the best result is the ADAM optimizer, which is here. So you can see how fast it is rolling off to the global optima with minimum cost. So training cost is also very low because it is giving you the better result compared to the rest of the four. And why it is giving this good result? Because it is combining the advantages of AdaGrad and RMS prop. Now this is the algorithm that we need to review first. So how is it? How you try to work your way through? You randomly initialize your weights. Yes, it is randomly initialized when you start. Then you take the first step, feed forward. You do the forward pass. After doing the forward pass, you get the actual output. Then you compute the loss function and take the derivative of it. Once you take the derivative of it, you just look for the gradient for the last layer, and then you compute gradients for all the layers, and then you update your weights, and then you move ahead and you start again. So after that, this random initialization will not be done. Then it will be done from step 2 to step 6 in loop continuously. And after reaching to a certain desired behavior of your neural network and getting the value within the constraints, you can say that you have trained your neural network. So this is what the algorithm looks like. Now, what are the types of neural networks? How many types are out there? So one is feed forward neural network, then radial basis function or RBF neural network, then Cohen self-organizing neural network or Cohen self-organizing graph, then recurrent neural networks or the RNNs, which are nothing but the LSTMs and GRUs, that is long short-term memory cells and gated recurrent unit cells. Apart from that, there are convolutional neural networks or CNNs. Some of the popular architecture include Inception from Google, VGGNet, ResNet. ResNet is from Microsoft, by the way. Then there is something called modular neural network. Then sequence to sequence neural networks, which consists 2 RNNs in sequence. And there are many more, like counter propagation neural networks and so on and so forth. The thing just continues. So these are the architecture that I promised that I will show. Just look at this. I mean, how many are there? and this thing, by the way, these things are just keep on coming. This is not just limited to this. There are, every time you see, there are different architectures available. This is the perceptron. This is feed forward. This is radial basis function network. This is deep feed forward network. This is RNN or the recurrent neural network. This is recurrent neural network with LSTM. This is recurrent neural network with GRU. This is autoencoders. This is variational autoencoders. This is denoising autoencoders. This is sparse autoencoders. This is Markov chain. So Markov chain deals with the probability theory and the probability concept of Markov chain, where your output depends on your current state. Then Hopfield network, then Boltzmann machine, then restricted Boltzmann machine, deep belief network, deep convolutional network, deconvolutional network, deep convolutional inverse graphics network. So this is inverse graphics network because the thing that you are getting here, you can actually recreate it by using the inverse graphics. Then generative adversarial networks or GANs, then liquid state machines or LSMs with spiking hidden cell. I think that this thing is spiking hidden cells. Then extreme learning machines or ELMs, echo state network, then deep residual network, Conan network, support vector machine, and neural Turing machine. So these are some of it. There are plenty of other architectures available. And if you Google it, you will see there are thousands of architectures available nowadays. And people are doing lots of tweaking and different combinations of these, and trying to create some different ansibles, trying to create some different architectures from scratch. So these are some of the types of neural networks that you get. So so the conclusion is that Facebook has had great success with identifying faces and in photographs by using deep learning, and that's how it actually gives you the ability to do the image search, or to tag or auto tag people. Now it's not just a marginal improvement but a game changer. So asked whether two unfamiliar photos of faces show the same person, a human being will get right 97.53% of the time. So that is the new software that was developed by researchers at FB that can give you 97.25% on the same challenge. So that is how it is working. It is working as almost human-like efficiency. And regardless of the variations in lighting or whether the person in the picture is directly facing the camera. So even from the side, or even the person is looking in somewhere else, even still the neural network is able to identify the person correctly. Similarly, speech recognition is another area that has felt deep learning's impact. Specifically, spoken languages are so vast and ambiguous. So Baidu, one of the leading search engines of China, that is nothing but a copy of Google, has developed a voice recognition system that is faster and more accurate than humans at producing text on a mobile phone in both English and Mandarin. Similarly, Google is now using deep learning to manage the energy at the company's data centers. They have cut their energy needs for cooling by 40%. That's a huge improvement, isn't it? 40%. That translates to about a 15% improvement in power usage efficiency for the company and hundreds of millions of dollars in savings. So deep learning is important because it finally makes these tasks accessible. It brings previously irrelevant workloads into the purview of machine learning. And we are just at the cusp of developers and business leaders understanding how they can use machine learning to drive business outcomes, and having more available tasks at your fingertips because of deep learning is going to transform the economy for the decades to come. So there will be completely new kind of jobs, there will be completely new kind of skills that will be required, new kinds of business areas that will open up, and so on and so forth. So I thank all of you for this, and let us get started with the I would say, with the code now. So let us get started with the code. Here I will be using TensorFlow as my backend, and I will be using Keras APIs because that is the simplest and easiest way to make a neural network. Now, here I am using the miles per gallon dataset. So what does this dataset says? This example shows how to encode your miles per gallon dataset for regression. This is slightly more complex than Iris, and that's what you expect, I guess. because it is important. So input has both numerical and categorical values, and it also has the missing values. And I will show you how to do this, how to do the data engineering for this. Now this example uses functions defined above in this notepad. So I'm just using some of the functions that I previously made just in order to do the data engineering with handling missing values, encoding the text to the numeric value, etc., etc. And that is how it will be done. So
Madhav sir, Sejal ma'am here.
hello.
Sir, Sejal ma'am here. Sorry to interrupt you. Actually, we got request from the participant to increase the coding part. I mean, you can zoom the size of this Jupyter notebook if possible.
Okay. I hope it is visible now, I guess.
Yes, sir. It is visible now.
Moving on. Let us start from the imports. So here I am importing a sequential module from my Keras package of my TensorFlow. Then I am also importing the layers called dance and activation. I am importing the library pandas. The pandas package, by the way, is used for dealing with data frames. I hope you all are aware of these pandas and stuff because it is the basic machine learning part. I am also importing IO module. I am also importing OS module. I am also importing requests module, although I am not using it here. I am importing NumPy, and I am importing sklearn, and from sklearn I am importing matrix. This matrix will actually help us judge the performance of our model. Now I am reading the data frame here. If you can see, this is how the data frame is. So if I can just add one more cell and try to visualize how this data frame looks like, you will realize. Let us get this thing going, and let us look through the data set first. How does the data set looks like, and what are its parameters that we are expecting to see. So this is how the data set is. This is your miles per gallon, or the average of your, or the mileage of your vehicle, and this is some data about it. So what are the total number of cylinders that are there in a particular car? What is the displacement that it can do? What is the horsepower of their engine capacity? What is the overall weight of the vehicle? What is the acceleration that you can get from 0 to 100? This is in seconds, by the way. This is the year of manufacturing or year of origin. This is the origin of it, and this is the name of the particular car model, that is Chevrolet, Chevelle Malibu, or Big Skylark 320, Plymouth Satellite, AMC Rebel, Ford Torino. These are the names of it. Our output will be to predict this MPG or to predict this miles per gallon thing, and this will be our inputs: cylinder, displacement, horsepower, weight, acceleration, year, origin, and name. This will be our inputs. And as you can see, this particular thing is a text. It is actually a string, and rest are the numerical variables. And because the structure of the data frame is as such, what we will do is we are trying to encode it, and that's how we will do it. So our X or our input will be cylinders, displacement, horsepower, weight, acceleration, year, and origin. And our output will be our miles per gallons. That's why it is denoted here as Y. I'm removing this cars thing here because it is not needed as such right now. We don't want to complicate it unnecessarily. And in the horsepower, where I have some missing variables in the horsepower, all I'm trying to do is I'm filling it with the median value. I'm not filling it with the mean, I'm filling it with the median value. And I hope you are aware of mean, mode, median, and all the central tendencies and some basic statistics. So this is how I'm trying to do. Then what I'm doing is I am building a neural network. And how I'm doing it? I'm importing a sequential keyword or sequential function where I'm telling my Keras that I want to make a sequential neural network, and my input dimension will be this. So it will be one particular row like this, having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 columns. So it will be 1 cross 7 columns. That will be your input, because there are 7 different input variables. So your input layer now has 7 neurons, which is nothing but the values of this. Then what you are trying to do? Your first hidden layer has 25 neurons with dense connections. That is, all the neurons are connected to your input, and the shape of its input dimension is 7. Why? Because we have this 7 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Because we have 7 input parameters. That's why I'm giving this input dimension here as dot shape 1. So shape 1 tells you how what are the number of columns. If I take shape 0, it will tell you the number of rows. But we are interested in columns because columns are your parameters. That is why you are doing this. So this is my hidden layer 1, and I am using the activation function ReLU. I explained you before, right? ReLU. Then my second hidden layer has 10 neurons, only 10. And my activation function is again ReLU, and my hidden layer 2 is complete. And because my output is just a number of miles per gallon, all I'm trying to do is I have just one particular neuron with no activation function, because that is what it is. It is just a value that you are trying to predict. Activation is already there, which is mentioned here, ReLU. And it has a dense connections. That means this particular one neuron is connected to all the 10 here. Similarly, each and every neuron of this particular layer has all the connections to these 25 neurons, and each and every 25 neurons will have dense connection to all these 7 input variables or input neurons. So this is how it looks like. Now, when I compile it, this is the loss function I'm mentioning, mean squared error. I explained you in the previous slides, and I'm using the Adam optimizer. And these are some of the hyperparameters that I'm using at the time of fit. So when I'm using this method fit, I'm actually training my entire neural network. I'm giving this X as my input, this Y as my output, and this verbose is nothing but whatever you get printed here can be done through this. So it can take values like 0, 1, 2, 3, and you can just use whatever that you want. I'm using 2 because I want to check the value of my loss function for each and every epoch, and total number of epochs are 100 that I'm giving. Now you can see that I am using a GPU enabled environment here with the version of TensorFlow 2.1. So my training speed of this particular neural network will be very, very fast, and that's what I want. So if I just press run, you will see see the speed of it, right? It is only happening because I have the NVIDIA GPU installed on my laptop, and this is the last value that I got of my loss function. This is my error. Mind you, this is not root mean squared error, by the way. This is just a mean squared error. I can take a root of it and I can see how it is going on. So root is not the main thing. Main thing is I am minimizing the Euclidean distance between the actual output and the output that I desire. Now, if I plot the training of it, just plot how the loss function is varied, you can see, isn't it, that this is how it is going. So it starts from really huge error, some 175 million, and then it is going slightly and it is going near to 0. It is not going to 0, as we all know. It is reduced to 54 point something. But well, to reduce 1.75 million to 54 point something is a huge task. I think that's a good improvement in our neural network model. And you can see here, right, when it started, it was some 1.75 million, isn't it? You can see how big the loss function was. So this is the huge error that we started from, and then we keep on reducing. It reduced quite fast, and then after a certain point of epochs, it just plateaued So after epochs which are somewhere here, it just plateaued and you got the saturation, but still you got some reasonable improvement. And that you can see here. If you observe the values, you can see from here that from 175 million or 173,660,000 that you started with, it reduced dramatically within one epoch to 41,000 something and 4,000 something. So it is almost, you can see here, right? It is almost the decimal part. So 100-fold improvements that you are getting here. And 4129, then 411, then 504, then 218, 151. So now you are seeing it is starting to get saturated, specifically from 218. Because in epoch number 6, I got to 218, but from 218 to go to 54, well, it took about 94 more epochs. So, and that you can see here. It is hovering around some 120, 123, 130s, 110s, 100s. So it is a quite gradual improvement after that point, up to this particular point. Now, this is what you are seeing here, and this is what your training mean squared error looks like. Here, by the way, I am using matplotlib package, and I'm using pyplot from matplotlib, and I'm just using this parameter loss from history. Why? Because I have stored this particular, the return value of this particular fit method into the history variable. So I'm just taking from the history and getting this loss variable, and I'm just plotting it down. I'm giving my X label and Y label. I'm mentioning the title of this particular image, and this is just the legend for this particular thing in the upper left corner. I can do it in the upper right if it is actually harming our view. You can just change it to upper right and you rerun it. And when you rerun it, this will be moved. So it is moved to upper right, as you can see here. Before it was here, now it is here. And you can see how the improvement has happened, how it started, etc. So these are your number of epochs up to 100 that you specified. This is your mean squared error that you are trying to reduce. So, well, let me introduce you to the hyperparameters that I'm using in this package. So if you look at the above code, you will see that the neural network is made up of 4 layers. The first layer is the input layer. This is specified in the input dim or input underscore dimension thing, which is here. This is input dim. I'm just mentioning my input layer here. Then it is set to the number of inputs that dataset has. So we have 7 variables. That's why I am taking 7 inputs. Now, one input neuron is needed for every input, so including dummy variables. And however, there are also several hidden layers. So there are 2 hidden layers here. For one, first hidden layer has 25 neurons, second has 10 neurons. And then you might be wondering how these numbers are chosen. So I must tell you, this is one of the most common questions about neural networks, and there is no good answer for it. I mean, you choose it randomly, to be honest. You just choose it randomly. And what you normally do is, if you have a number of input, for here our number of input neurons are 7. All I'm trying to do is increase it or expand it to 3 folds. So 7 is my number of input neurons. 7 3 is 24. My first layer is 25. So I've just expanded my feature space, and I reduce it up to some random number again, probably half or less than half of those neurons, that is 15 or 10. And then I get to the output. So this is how I chose it. This is how normally people start. So hidden neurons mean more capability to fit complex numbers on complex problems. So however, too many neurons can lead to overfitting and lengthy training times. You don't want that, definitely. You want to generalize it as much as possible. And too few can lead to underfitting. So the problem will sacrifice the accuracy. You do not want that too. So how many layers you have is another hyperparameter that is up to you to choose. And in general, more layers allow the neural network to be able to perform more of its own feature engineering and data processing. But this also come at the expense of long training times and risk of overfitting. And it also occupies your hardware and it is computationally very costly. You start number which is larger than your input layer and string towards the end. This is how you normally do, sort of, in a triangular fashion. So moving on, this was the thing. And this is the verbose thing that I explained before. You can choose 0, 1 and 2. I just chose 2 because I want the summary of entire progress output. If I could choose 0, there will be no output. It will just say complete or not. And if I say 1, it will display the progress bar. But then it does not work well with Jupyter notebooks that I'm using here, so I did not use it. And then I use this summary progress output here, and that's why I gave verbose equal to 2. So now, well, let us move ahead and give some random numbers. So now we are giving our rows from 1 to 10, and we are predicting miles per gallon for all those, just to check how our model is working. As you can see, you are getting some values here, and that is how it is. So you are giving some 10 values, you get some 10 values. This is nothing but your NumPy ND array that you are getting in return. Now, if you would like to just measure it, measure this prediction with our actual output that we got, I'm just taking the mean squared error of this prediction and y, and that is how it will be computed. So mean squared error, and then I'm taking the square root of it, giving me the root mean squared error overall. So this is the value, which is quite good, right? 7.4 is quite very good, I would say. Anything less than 10 is good when you're starting. Then you can gradually work towards it, and you try to improve it. These are again some sample predictions that I did. Let us see for which car name what miles per gallon that you have actually got and what is the predicted values. So you get the idea. So the first value here is 18 point naught. Here it is 14 point something. That is for Chevrolet Malibu. Then for Skylark 320, you got actual value is 15, predicted is 10. For Plymouth Satellite, actual is 18, predicted is 10. So here it is not performing that well, and hence you get the error. Here also, the Rebel SST, the miles per gallon predicted is 60. The original is 16, predicted is 9. Here it is 17, 11, 15, 9, 14, 7, 14, 7, 14, 6. So you can see, right? It is the 7. Almost the entire thing mounts up to, on an average, up to 7 point something. And that's why you're getting what you're getting. So that's what your mean squared error tells you about. So that 7 point something is nothing but your Euclidean distance from your original miles per gallon to the predicted miles per gallon. Now, that was the regression that we looked at. Let us move ahead and look for the classification problem. So classification is a process by which neural network attempts to classify the input into one or more classes. Here I am using the iris flower dataset. I am getting it again from my C drive. You can download it if you want. Just use requests and use .get function. You can use it here itself. So what are the values that I am going to specify or classify is mentioned here. So again, if I just add, if I just add one more cell, and let us look at the database that we are dealing with first. So you will be able to understand. Now, if I just print my data frame or the CSV file that contains the data, you will be able to see. So this is the iris flower. This is the sepal length, sepal width, and this is petal length and petal width. And these are the species. So what are the different species that we are dealing with? There are only 3 species: Sentosa, versicolor, and virginica. These are the three names of those flowers that we are trying to classify based on the data of sepal length, sepal width, and petal width. I hope you all are aware of what is sepal and what is petal for flowers. If not, you can just Google it. I mean, you'll get the data and you'll get the images where you can realize what is petal and sepal. So if I just say iris flower in Google, and you will realize the images. So if I open the image here, these are called the petals. This is flower petals. 1, 2, 3. You know. So these are the petals, and these are the sepals. 1, 2, 3. You know. So this is what the petals and sepals stand for, and this is what we are trying to measure in order to decide which particular flower species we are dealing with. Again, as I explained, these are some of the imports. I'm importing pandas. I'm importing sequential, this Keras layers, tense activation. Here I'm also importing early stopping. I'll explain in a bit what early stopping does. These are some of the standard imports. Then I'm reading my data frame. I'm converting it to the NumPy classification arrays. So this is my input. This is my output. And this species thing is actually getting you the important because it is string right now. Iris virginica or versicolor or Sentosa are strings. I'm just converting this to 0, 1, and 2. So I'm just enumerating them. I'm doing nothing but enumerating them, and that's all I'm doing actually. Now, when I'm building the model, here you can see, again I'm telling my TensorFlow backend that it is a sequential model, and my first layer has 50 neurons right now. Previously we used 25 and 10. I'm using 50 in my first hidden layer. My second hidden layer has 25. Again, both of them having activation functions ReLU. Here my input dimension shape is 1. Why? Because my features are my columns, and those are 4 features: 1, 2, 3, 4. Sepal length, sepal width, petal length, petal width. Species is my output, and that is why I'm mentioning my input dimension here as 0.1 or dot shape 1. Then this is my output that I'm trying to deal with. And recall, this is not just a single value, but these are 3 values. That is values for Sentosa, values for virginica, and values for versicolor. And what is the reason? Because right now this will not give us the value of the species name. It is actually giving me the probability that given a particular input, how much probability it is for that particular input to be Sentosa, virginica, or versicolor. That's what this thing is saying. And hence I'm using the activation function softmax. Softmax is also simpler as a sigmoid. It is just that softmax also gives you something between 0 to 1. And that is the reason we are having this here. This will be my output activation function. Rest will be ReLU, as I already explained. Now, recall the slide of classification. I explained you the categorical cross entropy. And that is my loss function. I'm minimizing my categorical cross entropy. And my optimizer is Adam again. My verbose, my hyperparameter is 2. My epochs are 100. So if I just run it now, you can see this, right? How fast it is working. Again, it is because the GPU that I have. If you don't have the GPU, it may take a while. Here my 100 epochs are just like that computed. And as you can see, here my loss function is 0.0932. That's quite amazing, isn't it? That's remarkable in terms of performance. How it started? Well, it started with 1 point something, and then it was reduced up to 0.09. So again, you are getting some multifold improvements here in your loss function. Now, let us try to plot this this. Again, I'm using the same method, just that the model loss is my new title. Otherwise, the rest of the parameters are the same from the previous program of regression that I mentioned. And you know why, and you know how. So it started from 1.3, it goes to all the way up to 0.09. That's quite remarkable, isn't it? And again, we are seeing it is plateauing around here. It is saturating around here, and then the improvement is quite slow. Now, what are the species that we are dealing with? These are the species: Iris centosa, Iris versicolor, or Iris virginica. These are the only three species that I am trying to classify. Now, let us just get through the shape of your prediction thing. So, as I mentioned earlier, it is not giving the single value, but it is giving you probability for all the three. I know. I mean, this looks quite awkward. What the hell is this? But these are nothing but probability. If you see, this is 9.97 multiplied by 10 raised to minus 1. That is divided by 100. Or divided by 10, sorry. So now you have the 99% of the chance that it is the first species, and rest are quite large values. See, this is divided by 1000, so it is 0.002, and this is like divided by, it's more than a million, more than a billion, I would say. So this is what the values are. So these are nothing but your probabilities. And because the probabilities I have only given for 0 to 10, I'm here having it for 0 to 10, but I'm giving the 150 different inputs all together in my X in order to predict. So in order to, just do away with these messy numbers and have some clear 0, 1, 2 agenda, you just use this method of your NumPy package called set print options and suppress equal to true. By default, suppress is false. If you do suppress true, it will just suppress it to 0 and 1 and make it an integer. And that is why I'm doing it, and that is what I'm getting it. See, now it is quite clear, like 1, 0, 0, and you have a very clear cut views. The problem here is I'm just printing first 10 lines. That's why you're getting this only one. If you print all of them, you will get the value for all of them, which is here. Just finding the argmax of it. That is argmax of whatever the column that is there. It is either 0 or 1 or 2. It will give you the column number. So for the one that is highest value in first column, it will give you 1. If the 1 is here and rest are 0, it will give you 2. If 1 is here and rest are 0, it will give you 3. So these are predicted classes, expected classes, and the stuff that you're getting. So if you can see, it is almost similar, I would say. It is like column number 0, column number 1, and column number 2, because Python or NumPy starts calculation from 0 rather than 1. So that's what you're getting here. Now, let us plot the confusion matrix. I hope you guys are aware of confusion matrix, because it is again a standard machine learning thing. So you must have learned it in the previous sessions which were there before me. And let us just produce the confusion matrix, which is from the sklearn.matrix. And this is function confusion matrix method, where I just give in expected class and predicted class. So if I do it, you get this value here. And you know what it is, right? The best way, I mean, the best performing model should have this kind of structure that we have. These are just rows, nothing else, just the diagonal values. So this is your centosa, versicolor, and virginica. This is again centosa, versicolor, and virginica. So this is predicted value vis-a-vis true value. So as you can see, there is no error in your iris centosa. There are 3 misclassifications in your iris versicolor, and one misclassification in your iris virginica. So if I want to now, plot this as a color map or heat map, I can just use the Seaborn package in Python and just set the font scale. It is up to you how want you set it. I want it bit larger so that I can view it, hence I did it. And annotation and stuff is a size of 16, and I'm just plotting it using matplotlib.pyplot package. So if you get this, This is what the heat map looks like. See, so what you actually want is you want all this to be dark and this to be lighter. So based on this, this is in between shade between this and that. Why? Because there are 3 misclassifications here. So these are some of the false alarms that we got. This is how you can plot the confusion matrix. This is the species that I got from my predictor classes. Again, I'm keeping it for 1 to 10. I can actually do it for, well, 1 to 20 instead of 1 to 10, just to see, or maybe 1 to 40 for that matter. And if I run it, see, I can see how it is going on and what it is going on. I can actually also make it 1 to 100 just for the betterment. So we could see some variety. Now that you are seeing it, right? Some of them are Sentosa, some of them are Virginica, some of them are versicolor. Based on that, let us get to the accuracy score. Again, it is imported from the sklearn package, and accuracy also takes 2 arguments, that is expected class and predicted class, same as your confusion matrix, and then you get the accuracy score. And that is 0.97 times. So that's quite huge. It's a very good accuracy actually. If you're getting something more than 0.9596, that is good. So we are getting 0.97 this time around. And let us try to do some ad hoc predictions. So let us say that these are some user manufactured values of this petal length, petal width, sepal length, and sepal width. And I am trying to predict what kind of flower this could be with this kind of attributes. So then I'm just taking the prediction of it by using this predict method, where my model is predicting on my sample flower. I'm printing it out, the normal raw values. Then I'm taking the R max of it and then predicting out that, so that we can know what species that actually this thing has predicted. So if you run it now, as you can see, this has predicted Iris virginica, that is 5342. This is the input. That's the correct output. Similarly, some more ad hoc predictions just to see. One is Iris virginica, this thing, one is Iris sentosa. So you can see, right, this is 5.0 and this is 5.2. It's a very minute difference for human to notice. But well, this is neural network and it has 0.97 efficiency. So that is almost 97% efficiency. And that's why you are getting even the minute differences quite easily detected. And it is differentiating. That's first is virginica, second is sentosa. So apart from this, there are different other neural networks also, like convolutional neural networks, like recurrent neural networks. I have the code and stuff for them, but if I start explaining right now, it will go quite deep, and it will take its own long amount of time. So as a basic introductory session, I would like to finish it with here